Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 113 of Kouryer Podcast. Our today's guest is Shahriar Shahrabi. He's a game developer, a graphic programmer, and painter from Berlin, Germany. Now, with that quick introduction out of the way, let's just jump into the first and most common question I ask every guest. Give us a little introduction on how you got into visual arts and design. Like, basically, how did your story begin in a nutshell?
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, we just jump into the question. I always had an interest in visual design. However, I was born in Iran, and during our art sessions in school, they replaced it with mathematics. We still had art in the timetable, but we never had really art. We always did other stuff. So although I always had some interest in the topic, it wasn't something that I really learned until I went to London when I was 14, and there I had a friend of mine who was used to sit right next to me, and he would draw these things. And at the time, I couldn't draw straight lines. I was just so clueless of how art works and how you make things. But I was always like struggling to communicate using words some of the emotions and feelings and thoughts I had. And seeing this guy just bring this image to the paper kind of blew me away with the what this is it like so much you can communicate in 5 minutes. I got really interested, so I started doing that myself, and I found that pretty immediately I can't do that in 5 minutes. Some of the first paintings I did were just horrible. I still have them from time to time. I look at them just for the laughs, and I started focusing on like learning the fundamentals of how to draw things, how to paint things, and I really fell in love with painting. uh, Over the next few years afterwards, until I was like 18, 19, I spent hours and hours on the weekends painting hundreds of paintings. And after a while, though, as I was like choosing what to study, uh, painting wasn't enough for me because I also really liked maths. And the type of problem solving I would get in like a physics problem, the satisfaction I got from like breaking down a complicated problem and um, let's say solve it and then look back at the solution with disbelief that I was the one who solved this problem through these incremental steps. I didn't get that from painting. So I kind of wanted to study physics, but I came to Berlin and I found that there is a study called game design, which kind of like combines programming and art together. And I thought that's perfect. So I started studying that, and over the next few years, I kind of started specializing more and more on things like linear algebra and mathematics and graphic APIs and really back end things. Uh, and after a while, I kind of started gaining my interest back to art because of like some sort of a series of coincidences where I had to do art direction for a lot of game projects and agency works. And I realized I still don't have, although I know the fundamentals of painting, like how to paint realistically. I know lights and perspective and all those things. I didn't know the fundamentals of aesthetic in the same level of mastery I had with programming. How does beauty truly work? Why do we find certain images intriguing? Why do certain images hold our attention? And in my own paintings, I could always like sideline those, but as I started working in game industry and sometimes as art director, I realized I cannot sideline those. Like I need to have an answer to these questions because I constantly have to produce images of not my own choice, not of my own choosing, that look intriguing. And that's a very difficult task because there's a difference between making a pretty thing to making a thing pretty. And this big difference just led me to invest a lot of time going back into art and starting to study like different you know uh, art genres and eras and painters and architects and cinematographers, and there I am now, kind of like my position is officially called tech art, which is a bridge between tech and art in the game industry.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. That's actually one of the subjects that I'm really interested in tech art, like making generative art and using different tools that, especially right now in VR space, like there's so many things available in that area that the people are developing right now. The tools like there's this famous artist called Goro Fujita or something. Do you know him?
Yeah, yeah, I know him. I don't
He's
know
a
him personally, but yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but he's also recently been doing this kind of daily challenge or something, and is making like 3D VR, like animations and stuff. It's so fascinating. And actually, like for anyone who's listening, I think you're also doing a project. I mean, of course, we're gonna go a bit deeper about it, like working on puzzling places with Realities IO, if I'm not wrong, right?
Correct. Yeah, correct.
And well, while we're on the topic, could you please explain to us what it is, and basically how did you stumble upon the whole concept and like this project?
Yeah, that's also very interesting. Yeah, you ask very interesting questions. Just I wonder if you planned that ahead so well.
Yeah,
And
sometimes I just compromise the questions in my head.
yeah, because there's a very interesting story behind that. I don't know if you have seen my older paintings of Persepolis and like palaces, Persian palaces.
Yes, I
Uh,
did.
I have been very interested in like reconstructing old locations, like somehow authentically. It's really hard to do them very authentically and give people a sense of stories through the location, because every location where someone lives in, right, they leave scratches and they leave footprints, and there are all these stories. Like every stone has a story behind it, and it was very satisfying to paint or try to relocate those locations as they were lived in, as they actually existed as a hub for human experiences. And I was always interested in that. And in video game industry, it's always like, um, right now, because of technology, there is so many things you can make. The main question is, okay, what should you make? What does truly bring value to other people or to yourself? Like, what makes you happy as a developer? And I always kind of wanted to tap into that. And light went off, unfortunately. And a while ago, I started working in Realities IO, which is a company specialized in photogrammetry. Photogrammetry is a technology where you take a series of pictures, and from these pictures, the pictures run through an algorithm which like detects different features, and through these features, it kind of analyzes how the features have moved or been translated or scaled. And because it has lens information, it can accurately guess the position of the camera in a 3D space as these pictures were taken. And based on these, it reconstructs a 3D model, right? And then it projects the texture on top of these 3D models. So you basically shoot 400, 500 images of a location, and then you get a 3D model of that location with everything in it, with every single scratch, every graffiti on on the wall, with every footstep that was there. It's an incredible technology, and I was really fascinated by that. Not just because of, well, the tech. I'm always interested in tech, but because of the potential it has to tell stories of locations, which was something I was interested in since I was 15. And interestingly enough, the people in the company were also very fascinated by the technology and the potential it had to tell stories. But we could never find a, a good usage for this technology, right? So we would scan a place, we would put it on VR, we give the glasses to people, and they would be like, wow, that's so realistic. Like, that's the most realistic thing I have ever seen in VR. And they would just rush through these environments, not paying attention to anything. Since I had a game design background, I started like trying to figure out a way to well, gamify the whole experience and interaction with the environment, so that people actually start paying attention to the environment. And it didn't matter what game I gave them. For example, I wanted for a cooperation we had with a French, not with a Canadian French TV station. I came up with this idea of like, okay, so maybe there are compasses, and then you, in order to go to the next location, you have to find clues, and people would start playing that game really well. Like they would find the clues and they would do that really well, but they still wouldn't pay attention to the environment. Until one of the days we were working together, and we have a pipeline where things get like chopped up to pieces because of performance reasons. And something went wrong in the pipeline, and we imported in the engine, and it was just like everything floating everywhere. And I made a joke that we should hire people to puzzle this back together like a game. And then there was like silence in the room, because we all knew this was it. This was the game. This was what we had been looking forward to. We wanted to find something where people engage with locations and their stories they're telling. This is it, where people have to pay attention to the location itself. So we kind of started, then after that, for the next few weeks, we had a lot to do. So the idea was shelved. But the first time I had time, I started like doing a mini prototype as like a proof of concept to pitch to the team so that we can kind of try to see if this is even fun, because a lot of game ideas sound fun on paper but they're actually not. And yeah, so we had the first version, and it was magic. Like, you take a 3D space, like a 3D castle, or a 3D like a room, a castle, and it can be anything, and then you chop it to pieces and it turns to a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. And from the first test, it was clear that it is very relaxing, engaging, and it teaches you things about a location that you wouldn't even learn if you were actually there, because you spend such a long time staring at tiny details, trying to figure out how these different pieces mash together, that you suddenly like find out that, oh, we had a scan of the environment we work in, and you would notice things like, oh, there is a scratch on that chair. I never noticed it was there, but now that I puzzled it. Yeah, so the game is already out. It is on Oculus Quest and launching for PlayStation VR end of this year. And yeah, people are really enjoying it.
All right, awesome. I'll definitely keep an eye on that. I mean, I will keep an eye on that, but I don't have neither the Oculus or the PlayStation VR. But I'll watch some gameplay footage on YouTube. That's what I do for every game that's been recently released. All right. So the next question is about your story of how you started. Like, were you originally studying art and design, like when you were in high school? Like, when you were planning for the future, when you had to, choose a major or something? Were you originally thinking of studying art and design, or that's the thing I want to go into a major, or you were pursuing another thing? Maybe you, well, I mean, as you know, like most, Iranian parents are kind of like, they want their children to go into, more STEM fields, like, maybe math, engineering, or, becoming a doctor or something, the whole spiel. And how was your, like, story in that regards?
Yeah, I wasn't planning to do learning art in the school. As I said, in Iran, we didn't even have it. We had it on the timetable, but the maths teacher would come in and would say something like, "Oh, maths time," and that was that. And as you also mentioned, in Iran, there's kind of like uh, there are a lot of exceptions, but usually the public perception of it is, if you're really smart, you start getting into maths and following things like architecture and being a doctor and stuff like that. And it just like gradually goes down to, like, from mathematical and engineering to doctors to well, biology, and then humanity, and like the very last place is art. So if you tell someone, "Oh, I'm majoring in art," they're like, "Okay, did you not get accepted to university, or what's the story?" And in high school, for example, I didn't do anything with art, even in England, and I was also very disappointed with the classic art education that people were getting, because I started directly learning art the way like concept artists do it. I was learning from a lot of concept artists, focusing on fundamentals and not as much on the like on the ideas or concepts, or the novelty of the concepts, but on, okay, execution, style, and stuff like that. And I remember that with one of the art teachers, I had a mentor that I would show her paintings from time to time, and she would express her opinions about that, and that was great. That partnership was great. But with another art teacher in the school, I remember once we were talking about perspective, and she said something like, uh, "Every point in a painting, every line in a painting goes to one of the three perspective points." I looked at her like, well, like, she knows there are more than three vanishing points on a lens behavior, right? And I tell her, "Yeah, what do you mean?" And she was like, "Everything." And I was like, "Okay, what about if I take this box and rotate it 45 degrees?" And she looked at me like that was the first time she actually thought about that in her life. And she was like, "Well, it still goes to one of the two vanishing points." I was like, "What?" I was so like confused, because the we had a lot of people. We actually had a good art, let's say, part of the school was pretty fit in art, and a lot of people would get to Cambridge and stuff like that for art studies. And I was so disappointed with the things that they focused on and the things that they were passionate with. So I didn't do any of that, and I was really focused on the math side of things. But once I got to Berlin again, like, this cross section between art and tech sounded so interesting to me. And as time went on, I just got interested in also fine art independent of its industrial use. Uh, but it was a hard decision, because also, as Iranian, visa is not a trivial thing. and after you're done with your studies, you need to find a job, right? And as a male Iranian, if you don't, you go back to Iran and you have to do 2 years of military service. So there was this entire pressure, and I had both a position for physics in a university, as well as I got accepted to the game design, and it was a really tough decision to be like, should I go there? And everyone in my family would be like, no, don't. Are you stupid? Why are you going into art? There's no future into that. Uh, I'm happy I did, of course, but it was a tough decision.
Oh yeah, I can definitely understand that, and like it's I'm gonna say something that's kind of off the subject right now, but not completely unrelated. But you know, when the whole NFT thing has started to boom, like last year in the winter, like there's a lot of criticism. It's still there are, and but one major thing it did that we're gonna actually feel it like in the next couple of decades is that all the bad and good things aside, it did one really important thing, and it put art as a major on the map. Like now it's not like before that only like there's biology related subjects like becoming a dentist, becoming a doctor, or becoming like high paying engineer or a programmer. Now there's also art on the table now. you know it
Yeah.
did that, and I think, but also it's gonna be like a all right. I'm gonna give another example. Like in 2014, in the YouTube scene, or I think even a bit more than that, there was this. Oh, sorry, in 2011, during those times, there was this fitness channel called Six Pack Shortcuts by this guy named Mike Chang, and he basically was kind of like I don't know how to like explain, but like, a snake oil salesman. He was doing all this stuff to promote his like bad quality supplements and stuff like that, but he was really good at marketing. And here's the thing: there are thousands of people, hundreds and thousands of people that, all right, this guy wasn't the most well-intentioned person, but because of his stuff, he got a lot of people into fitness. Maybe that's not the most accurate like analogy, but with the whole NFT thing, there's still a lot of problems with it, and there's a lot of problems I personally have with the culture and the audience of it. And like I'm not gonna get into that. But here's what it did. It put a lot of eyeballs on art. Yeah, maybe a lot of people got into NFT scene before the art. Oh my god, we're gonna make so much money, dude. Look how people are just making so much money with such bad art. They get into it, they make bad art for the hope of making some cash. They get miserable and they feel like a failure because it doesn't pan out. But here's the thing: a little spark is in their head, and some of those people might actually continue to learn and learn the fundamentals, become good artists, kind of
Yeah,
like that. And
for sure. Yeah. Yeah, one of the things it did is that it brought the eyes of the classic fine art, like capital A art, to digital art. Because digital art for the past few decade has always been like, that's one of the things I always get is like, oh, he paints. I mean, I can also just paint as well with oil or acrylic, but it's like he paints or watercolor or whatever. But because I usually do digital art stuff, that's for sure. That change was there, but at the same time, I'm not a really big fan of the auction system in the digital art world. I don't know how many, if you know of like the issues they have there with like painting flippings, and they would buy a painting and put it in some container ship, but it's like no one is going to look at it, and the person who actually made the purchasing decision is some art critic and not the guy who bought it. He doesn't even know what he bought. Like stuff like these, like speculative way of looking at as art as financial assets which you can flip later. uh, and there's a lot of history behind that, regarding, let's say, what the auction system, or actually I'm not going to get into that. That's going to be a podcast on its own.
yeah,
I was just going
exactly.
to start like talking about like the 18th 17th century Edo and compare it to impressionism, and the beginning of the end of the classic painting in Europe, which was a disaster. So that's a topic of its own. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so many things going on with the whole scene, but I mean, at the end of the day, people are gonna realize, like, I think in a couple of, I think that's the last note I'm gonna say on this subject. Sorry, that like in the beginning of the whole NFT boom, the percentage of like objectively bad art that was getting sold was a lot higher than now. Because do you know why? because the thing is, the major art collectors and buyers are the people who had a lot of crypto from before, like years ago, and they now suddenly become rich. And the sad thing, and the thing that I see a lot, is that a lot of artists are selling out for the hope of, like, getting the attention of these, like, collectors who don't know much about art, and, as you said, the science of aesthetic, what makes something intriguing, like, the most absurd things get sold for the sake of, like, memes, or I don't know, just the culture, like, it's not even a culture in my opinion, the culture of that this whole collectors and just NFT community has cultivated, and it's kind of like a bastardization of art, in my opinion, which
Yeah.
bef- which in some instances I can understand. For example, why CryptoPunks are popular, because in a historical sense, it has a valid reason, because in terms of, like, historical sense, it's valuable, in terms of the timeline of art, of humanity, of where it has become. But yeah, I mean, I think you can get the point of where I'm going with this kind of.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. I mean,
uh,
incentives are super important of why people create art. And even if you're like, let's forget NFTs or crypto, if you are making art for Twitter, let's say, or Instagram, you need to really be careful because you start like optimizing your art for certain stats and data, right? And one of the things I do, I have minimum amount of engagement on social medias because I have to extra be careful the entire time. Am I making this picture more contrast and conflict rich because I think it serves the narrative of what's in the picture, or because I know that's the thing that's going to get like and retweets? And as an artist, you always have to be careful what you optimize for. And historically, whoever pays the highest number for art derives the conversation, cultural conversation about what's valuable art. And what's valuable art is super important for the cultural identity of a group of people. And honestly, if you want to see what happens if a group of elites that don't understand anything about art but have the highest and deepest pockets determine good art, just go to any Baroque museum and look at Jesus number 568. Everyone in that painting look like, I don't want to be here. This is like the 50th time, or Haydn Symphony number 56. Like, that was the past. That was our cultural past. I don't think we should go back to that when, as everyone is trying to get to some sort of post scarcity economics where we can fly around the universe like Star Trek. We shouldn't use technology to bring back limited scarcity where we actually manage to do away with it. um, but that's just my take on it. And I do see a lot of opportunities there. Let's say once some problems that you mentioned are ironed out, as is the case with Silicon Valley, is like people get hype, investment flows in, you have a lot of rubbish, they die out. 5 years later, what remains creates an actual value. And I'm looking forward to that time to see where the technology is going to take us.
in the stuff you said, you also mentioned a point that I actually wanted to point that out by the end of the podcast. But since the subject is out, I'm just going to say it now. You said something that your engagement on social media was pretty low, and that was actually one of the things that was kind of like interesting to me when I first found your stuff. I was like, "Huh, how's that?" And I'm just gonna say just quick 2 3 points that I recently I've been thinking about and realized, and just noticing the art communities in general, not just in the American side or Iranian side or anything, just in general. And that is first about the audience of art profiles and channels and everything. If they see like someone who's making art and it has like a lot of high amount of followers, like in their brain subconsciously it says, all right, this is good art, I'm gonna follow, it's good, a lot of people follow. But if the same person had like 103 followers or something, but it's slow, there's a lower chance, because I don't know, I think it's something deep rooted and biological and subconscious with humans to act like this. But it's also good to be self-aware of it. Like I'm actually really like proud, and I'm just really admired what you said, that you think about when you post something, that all right, is this from me, or is this for a certain demographic? That is like super valuable and authentic to me, and kudos to you, sir. And another thing is that a lot of the artists, artist communities and circles, it seems like they kind of become not that it's a bad thing or anything, like, don't get me wrong, but it kind of turns into like a mafia-ish kind of thing. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, it's they have their close circles, and if you I don't know, want to get known, you have to kind of enter their circles. But I mean, like I don't know how to explain it, but it's kind of it's sounding a bit weird, but it kind of feels like this in some of these communities, art communities especially. Not just
Yeah,
I've seen this everywhere, not just in the Iranian art scene. It's also in NFT art scenes. It's America's art scene is everywhere. It's not a
yeah,
like an alien subject. And but I think, about your stuff. I think if someone's doing something, working on a project out of their heart and passion, I think in the long term it will always see results, and you don't need to um, worry about other stuff or metrics or anything. And it's something that I've been especially recently telling myself, that I'm just. It's kind of like a mantra I keep telling myself, that don't worry if it's gonna if it's gonna be a long process. Just focus on the stuff you want to love to make, and you don't even have to worry a single second about connecting with other people, just for the career aspect of it, and getting known. Just work on what you love in silence, and everything will work out. And objectively, if you just start studying, like, putting in the hours and the works, it will, you will see the results. That's what I'm trying to say. Just
yeah,
don't worry about anything. Just worry about, doing what you love. That sounds
yeah.
so
No,
cliche. I'm sorry. That sounds so cliche and cheesy, but that's true.
no, that is true. That is true. I mean, marketing and stuff like that are important, and those are also things you can learn. You can dedicate time to that to learn, but you should, like that. I did have also, as I was 15 or 16, I would have things like I would pay attention to stats. And I actually didn't do anything regarding like Iranian culture for a long time, because I have like a series of 20, 30 paintings of like different Iranian palaces that I reconstructed. And they became really popular because no one else was doing that at the time. There weren't many digital art painters in Iran, and there were even less who were like talking to a foreign audience, and less who was folk who had the opportunity because they didn't have to earn money, who could just do personal projects all the time. And like my paintings, some of them made it to even Iranian newspapers, stuff like that. So it was going really good. But one of the things that I was always like upset about was I was on DeviantArt at the time, and the number of downloads in the stats was higher than views. Forget favorites. Like, people would like download it, go and sell it as like chips, as anything you can imagine,
Oh
backcomment
god.
backgrounds. Like, half of my time was like chasing down people, being like, hey, even for Iranians newspapers like Donestaniha, which is like a newspaper for like things, they like took the art without asking for permission and like going and chasing it down. They were like, okay, here's 200,000 tomans, which is like nowadays like what, 15 euros. But so there was a lot of like stress going around, and I thought, wow, that this is not worth it. Every time I do something oriented towards, let's say, non-Iranian community, I get so much in return, and to Iranian community, I get nothing. Like they download it, they use it, but they put their own signature on it. They delete my signature. They write blog posts about it and misquote where the location is and all that. But over the years, I kind of like learned that I should separate my own self worth from my work. And that has been the single greatest thing I have ever invested on. Like, it took a long time. It took kind of like stepping back from social media and stepping back from being in this conversation, being these mafias, as you talked about, right? Because there's this community where people know each other, and some people make other people to gods because they're good, because they can do certain things, and then suddenly they're allowed to do everything. Morality is put to the side, and then there's this whole imposter syndrome, because suddenly some people are getting elevated because of their work to such degree, and they don't feel worthy of it. So their reaction is they start becoming arrogant to mask it. It's like such a complicated dynamic, and I didn't want to be I didn't have I didn't want to be there. I was like, okay, bye guys. So I took a step back and spent some years kind of like working on myself. And that was a very great investment to kind of learn that art you do and the work you do creates value for you and other people. And obviously you care about it, right? That's the point, right? That's You're an artist, you have something to say. However, it should never be more than like 20-30% of your life. You should have other things. You should have a partner, you should have friends, you should have hobbies you care about. So that when that goes down for 2 months, you're like 80% still happy, right? And once you kind of separate that, you stop caring about, okay, you never stop caring about the social media. That's our human social animal inside. But at least you recognize that you should care, not to let social media dictate your life, not to let that dictate your art. what you want to focus on and what you want to teach others, what you want to where you want to create value.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually such an interesting subject that we discuss on this podcast. I'm definitely gonna highlight into the stories as well for people to listen to this podcast in particular a bit more, about the subjects we just discussed, because I think this one, I've had other episodes which kind of went like this one, which there were a lot of notes that we kind of went through that I think is important for people to hear, and I think this episode is one of those as well. And all right, let's move on to the next subject, which is, I mean, of course, in the introduction, I mentioned the stuff you're working on, then the major, like basically your expertise that you're working on. But this question is like, what is your main branch of design that you're focusing on right now? And tell us about your experience from the start of it until now. And of course, I already mentioned that you're a game developer, graphic programmer, and a painter. But the thing that you're actively most working on right now, what is that?
I am I work on so many different things at the same time, but they're all kind of connected. Uh, like the thing that I enjoy the most doing nowadays, I mean, personally, not in work is a different thing. In work, I do art direction and game programming and graphic programming. Graphic programming has actually way less to do with the images themselves. I mean, it has everything to do with the images, but it's very technical, right? So it's all about maths and memory and managing resources and stuff like that. Um, the art direction thing is also way more technical than people would think, right? Before I got into art direction, I thought the job of an art director is to make a game pretty. Completely misread it. Like it's maybe like 20% of the job. If you're lucky, you can make your game pretty. But the main job of an art director is to effectively communicate something with a viewer, right? In terms of a games, that would be where's your main character, what's the main thing you're supposed to do, where's the thing you're looking for, or the game is letting you know, hey, there's something that needs your attention. Look at that. And this is such a iterative task. I mean, as most design is, where you have a goal, you set up your pillars, and you're like, okay, what is the most important thing? You try to solve for those, and usually visual interest, if it looks good, is like the very last thing. In my personal projects, though, what I really enjoy is like creating scenes, like tiny scenes that sell emotions in a way, which kind of use my entire expertise range. Over the years, because I wanted to bring this thing on the screen, right? I always had these like different visions. Like making art makes me excited because there's this entire world in front of you, right? You can make anything you want. And I was always like limited by my abilities. Now, over the years, um, I learned the design side. Now I learned how to model, how to texture, how to animate, how to rig, and then I learned how to program the whole thing, the engines that do it. And now I kind of feel like ignoring sound. That's my last project. I actually have like three, four composing books there, which I'm probably going to get into in a few years. But I kind of had a feeling, okay, now I can truly make my vision. Without having to find out how do I finance it, how do I pay other people to fill my gaps, and that's a lot of fun. Like the garden you mentioned, the Persian garden, we were talking about before the podcast, is a project that went for like a month and a half, which I just immensely enjoyed. It was such a special experience for me. It started with, I decided to program a fluid simulation, which is kind of like a rite of passage for graphic programmers because it is quite a complicated technique and it requires a lot of work. And I thought, well, I'm not just a graphic programmer, I'm also, an artist. And I don't want to just put a box there where the fluid is just going around and be like done. So what should I do? And I decided to make a little Persian garden in the style that people still have in places like Yazd or even Tehran or different parts of Iran. And this project became really personal because I could input things in there like I don't know if you noticed this plastic ball, uh,
Yeah,
and
the
that's like,
pink white one.
yeah, exactly. And for
All
anyone
right.
who has been to Iran, that just like brings you back. Like you don't find that on any references. You have to have lived it to know we were playing with that thing everywhere. And it was such an special thing. An entire scene is filled with these things. And then I put the fluid simulation in it. And I realized how important this project to me is because this was a project only I could do, you know? I don't mean that technically or anything, but in the sense that artistically, I was projecting so much of myself into this. This was unique. This was me. Um, and I was really happy with that. I was really happy with how much of everything I love and everything I have experienced as a human being is in this simple scene. Then I can just show that to people and be like, "That's me." There you go. And yeah, so that's kind of like personal where I work on most. It usually starts with a sketch, with like a black and white sketch. Then I take it to some medium where I paint over and try to figure out how the location looks. Then Pinterest, obviously, trying to find out as many references for the emotions, for the forms, for the colors, and actual semantic references, how things look like. And then from that, I start building some 3D stuff and then do all the technical stuff like animation, programming things for it, making things implemented in a game engine. And at the end, like doing the marketing for it and a write up. That's always a very important part for me to not just give someone something and be like, hey, look, I made something neat. It's like, hey, here I made something neat, and if you want to make it too, here is how you do it, and that part is really important to me. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now.
And speaking about the project you just mentioned, the Persian, garden. Actually, fun fact for the podcast listeners: while I was looking for Persian architecture and Iranian architecture references for my own projects and practices, I like in Google Images I was scrolling down and I just saw this that looks interesting in the results, and I clicked on it. It was a Sketchfab link, and it was like oh Jesus, it has 3D model. You can zoom in, zoom out. There's simulation, and I was like, I really like the energy of it, the vibe of it. Honestly, that's the story of how I found Mr. Shahrabi, and we're speaking right now. And I was like, who is the creator of this? And I was like, oh, it's him. It's his Twitter, and I messaged him, and here we are. And of course, I put the link to the the project in the captions as well, so you can check it out. I in the Sketchfab section in the caption, you can see the link if you want to see it for yourself. And of course, I'm gonna put it in the reel of the podcast as usual, so you guys could see it as well. And all right, about this project, let's jump into another project that you did. You're working at Grizzly Games Studios. That's the other thing you're doing. And about that, there's this game you guys mentioned, like two games you've worked on. Like one of them is Superflight, and the second one is Outlander, something like that. Islander, sorry, I've
Islander, Islander. Yeah, but
Islanders.
I wasn't in the company anymore. So we
Ah,
co-founded the company, and then after Superflight, I left to start working in VR, which is then very positive places. The second game I'm making, gaming.
all right, and about the Superflight, I'm actually going to put some, video game footage in also the reel as well in the video version of the podcast, so you guys can see what it is. But I highly recommend it. Everyone, it's super cheap game. It's on Steam. Even put the Steam link in the captions as well if you guys want to check it out for yourself. And yeah, I mean, as you can see in the footage, it's probably going to pop out right now in the podcast footage right now. Sorry for audio listeners. You can check it in the Steam or YouTube. And it has a lot of about the game, aside from the questions of how did you make it, the process, the thought process. There's one major thing that I'm interested in. It got super successful and popular. All the most of the major game review, game journalists wrote about it, Kotaku, IGN, everything. How did you guys approach the marketing of it? Like, how did it just span out in your opinion? How did it got so popular?
Yeah, the main point in our marketing was honesty. Um, I think there is like marketing is people to people, right? And you explain people something, and if they kind of have a feel like you're trying to, because it's like bigger companies marketing, they try to create value where there is none, and that doesn't work. I mean, it's like you can hire an MBA guy who just does some like business thing, and then either that thing has a value or not. So I guess one of the main key points of marketing is the actual product, right? So in our case, we knew what value we are going to offer to people, and that made it very easy for us to kind of market because we just had to honestly communicate, hey, this is what we provide, and that's it. If you want to see like even a better example of our type of marketing done is one of my colleagues from the time, Paul Schnepf. He released just another game a few months ago, like 2 3 weeks ago, called The Ramp. The game is basically a digital toy, super short. You can play through in 10 minutes, and the game was also really successful. Was in the list of best-selling iOS. In Steam, was doing really good. And one of the main things that you look in is just like honestly communicating, hey, this is a digital toy, and it's just going to take you 10 minutes to play through. It's super simple. And he even said, I'm probably not even going to update it anymore. Done. And people knew what they were going to get into, right? Because the worst part of marketing is when you promise people and you don't deliver and they get angry. And that's really important on Steam because reviews kind of drive the algorithm and drive visibility. So the way we try to approach the entire marketing was to be very clear from beginning on what type of game we wanted to make and why does it even create value for people. And in terms of Superflight, that was we wanted to make this kind of a relaxed game you can play on sofa, right? You can just jump in very fast and you can jump out very fast. We imagined like the playtime to be around 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then you can just like drop it and come back to it a year later. It wouldn't matter, you know. You can just jump in whenever you wanted to relax. And this actually happened to be the case. Most people kind of use the game. They would give us feedback to be like, hey, this is my espresso in the morning. I wake up, I play Superfly for 5 minutes, and I just get to the bus and go to school. And I was like, yeah, awesome. That's exactly what we wanted to have.
And another thing, another little tidbit about the game that I really enjoy, that it's been so long that I've seen in a game, is the icon graphics of it. It looks like a low res kind of like a landscape of it, which is super reminiscent of like games from like 15, 20 years ago on our desktop. You remember those times when you had our desktops were messy and full of those icons like GTA, Red Alert, Generals, so many of those games. The low resolution icon, that kind of thing. Was that intentional or it just happened?
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean,
Oh,
there's a, yeah, of course. So the person who did the art direction for Superflight, it wasn't me. Most of the art direction was done by my colleague Friedemann, and he's super talented. And one of the things that was really important for us was we wanted to finish this game, right? We wanted to. This was a university project, but we didn't want to finish the term and be like, okay, done. We wanted to actually find out for ourselves, can we sell games? Can we make this to a business? And for various reasons, this was important for every single one of us. For me, because of my visa, I didn't want to get thrown out of the country. For the other two, also because that's what they wanted to do. And maybe they even had some pressure from other people that, hey, game design, can you actually make money through it? So it was kind of a thing we wanted to prove to ourselves. And art takes a long time, right? It's really hard to make good art. And there's a reason why a lot of these, let's say, smaller scoped game, at least at the beginning, as they were smaller scoped, have graphics similar to ours, is because um, the lower resolution of it kind of like helps to, offer content for it that still looks good. And then we kind of try to give the player or the viewer has to kind of fill in the gap with their imagination, and that happens to work great for a lot of different products. And yeah, I was really impressed with the work he did on Superflight in terms of art direction. We managed to finish the game in 3 months, which was sporty considering how little we knew about how to make games. Even nowadays, I'm like, wow, we made that game 3 months. That's crazy. uh, I'm not sure I could pull it off again, even though I know so much more now. Perhaps because exactly because I know so much more, I would be like, oh no, maybe we should have normal maps. Maybe we need to have grass. Maybe then we have a waterfall that comes in and lava on the ground. And at the time, we couldn't do any of these. So we were like, what can we do? Let's make a game out of that and market it honestly.
yeah, and another interesting thing about the game is that whenever you you jump down and just go fall down and down, and of course the stage changes, it transitions into another world. I don't know. The first time I did that in Elizabeth, it's kind of the sound and everything. It's kind of spooks me out. But after we go to another world, I was like, oh, I'm back. Like, yeah, the design decisions was kind of interesting, to say the least. I suggest everyone to try the game for themselves. Um, don't pirate it. I mean, come on, it's cheap as hell.
it's it's fine. It's fine. We're all fine also with pirating. We earn our money, and
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if like, yeah, I mean, just go buy the game, guys. Like, it's just 2, 3 euros or dollars. But I mean, yeah, for every region it changes. But in general, I think it's the price of 2 to 3 breads or two breads pieces of bread, regardless of where you live. So yeah, I mean, do give it a try. You can already see the footage here in the video version of the podcast. And well, let's jump into the next subject, which was. And speaking of all the projects you worked on, this one is kind of like an interesting question. which is what was the first art job paycheck you ever got, and what was it for, and how did you feel at the time when you got it?
Uh, Paycheck, huh? Because I did do some projects when I was younger, but I couldn't earn money at the time. So I think the first proper art paycheck I got was in the third term of university, just before we released Superflight. My professor approached me if I want to work for a project for the Charité, which was the in Germany. It's a hospital in Berlin. And I said yes. And the part was like the designing and programming of the whole thing. So not just the art side, but also the programming side of making the entire thing. Uh, that was a that was exciting. That was exciting. Um, there was some miscommunication, and at the end, we found out that very late that the project wasn't what the client expected. I wasn't talking to the client directly at all. And the moment I started talking to the client, he was like, "Okay, you guys misunderstood something. You need to do something else completely." And I was like, "Okay, what do we need to do?" And he kind of rebranded the project to this. And I thought that's too much work, man. I cannot make this until the end of the month. Like that was December the 14th or whatever. And he said, "Yeah, it needs to be finished by 2nd of January." And I said, 2nd of January, huh? I can't make that. It's like a holiday. And I was working in the Philharmonie, Berlin Philharmonic at the time, organizing concerts. So I had also other things to do. It's like, I can't make it until that. And he was like, man, you can't say no because project is for NASA and it's going to International Space Station with a rocket on the 2nd of January. I was like, what? No one told me that. My hands started shaking. I was like, I am not
Mm.
ready for this responsibility. I'm like first year university student. What the hell? Um, and I told him that also I didn't program the thing for scientific research. Like, ask me what the error margin is. I'm like, oh, plus minus 25%. I don't know. Like, you can't write a paper around that. Um, Very exciting, very exciting. So he canceled his own vacation with his family to go to Hawaii, and I kind of got like, how am I gonna say, blackmailed, but like light pressed that, hey, you don't want to like screw with the reputation of, you know, people in Charité and your professor and everyone else who kind of like hired you, because your name is not going to be in the research paper, but theirs is. And you're a student, and you're a student in a foreign country. And I was like, oh, okay. God damn it. And so we started working and iterating on it, and we finished it in 2 weeks. And I was so bent from that I basically didn't do any new projects for like 7 months, 6 months. And okay, at the time we were still kind of started to make Superflight at the end of it, but after that band out, I started kind of working with the team on Superflight. Like, it was going on the entire time, and that was a really pleasant experience that we didn't have to overwork too much. And that's why I considered for myself the first paycheck, the money that kind of flew in from Superflight, instead of the other one. The other one wasn't a really pleasant experience. um, and I'm really happy I also got that experience, because it set some boundaries for me that um, entertainment is very brutal, like in the sense that people expect you to work crazy hours. Like, they give you a contract and you sign it. It doesn't mean anything if you cannot enforce it on a bigger company, and if you don't have the budget to go after them. And project scope suddenly changes, and if you're not capable of like dealing with that, you're going to be in a big trouble, because they kind of push you into doing more work than what you should, what you should do legally, morally, or any personal obligation you have to the project. So yeah, that was the first one.
Right, that was a quite a story.
Yeah.
Jesus. And the next question is kind of like a tricky question for most artists when I ask them, which is, who are your favorite artists and designers that have inspired you the most?
Ooh, which continent, which time? Like, I have. It's kind of like asking me what's my
Anything.
favorite book. I can tell you
Yeah, you
who
can
has.
just anything that.
Okay. I can tell you who has inspired me
All
recently
right,
a
just go
lot.
on.
Okay, give me 2 seconds. So This
Sure, sure,
guy,
no problem.
this guy,
All right.
Japanese school of painting, incredible. Like composition is just absolutely incredible. Like I am so intrigued by like what started in Tang Song Dynasty China 800 years ago, 900 years ago, went through Korea and Japan. The entire culture that developed, kind of like a symbolic thing where composition or lines you put on the paper is not supposed to represent a realistic description of the shape, but an emotional or a more like a abstract description of what these things actually is in essence, right? And I have, oh god, I don't even know if I can like take these all out. But I have a huge library of art books here. Uh, Kawase Houseway.
Awesome.
That's also one of my favorites from the Japanese ones. I would say I was obsessed the past few year, like a year or something, with woodblock prints from Kawase House being not being the only one, of course. From the Shinhanga, which is the 20th century Japanese woodblocks, and that kind of like moved back to Edo era woodblock obsession, which kind of moved back to Song Dynasty and Tang Dynasty uh, ink paintings, and that was my latest obsessions. But of course, again, I have like an two blocks of books here dedicated to different artists of different time and collections of their works. So yeah.
All right. Awesome. And all right, let's jump into some like general stuff that we haven't dived deep enough yet. Um, for instance, let's talk about a bit about how we discussed that the whole NFT scene right now, the kind of art scene in general, not just NFTs, are moving towards art that is like directed towards the tastes of the collectors and people with big pockets. But let's talk about a bit about the aesthetic of art. Like, in your opinion, like in general, throughout all your studies, like if you could wrap up the whole the missing link that's right now being felt in the art scene in general today, what are those in terms of aesthetics in your opinion?
The missing link between, you mean the people, like consumer and actual artist, or the art? I mean, I can answer it in a more general sense. I think there's a lot of like um, miscommunication happening, and there are different like branches of people who do art. They kind of like collectively go under certain umbrellas. You have like the capital A art, which is like what is usually taught in universities, and from the perception of a lot of people, they're bonkers. Like it's like, why am I buying a condom for 50,000 euros? And it's like, and there's a lot of artists in that scene that I actually quite like. It's not that I don't like their work. I do. And then there's the other camp, which is the industry artists. You know, I think people like, I don't know, Disney, for example, really like um, push that forward. One of my favorite sentences from Disney is saying, "Oh, I don't care about this art stuff. Show me like show me the entertainment. Like, what is the entertainment in this scene? What's the conflict? What's the value? What are we providing?" And the entire debate around what is even art and what we should consider an artist or not is a big one. It's a really big one, and there is a cultural like shift towards more conceptual stuff that has been going on for a long time, right? So you had like the Baroque and the classics, where rules were important and people really care about reproducing harmony. And then as time went on for romantics, like the motifs started becoming more important. Like, what are you actually painting? Like, sometimes you can sacrifice famous sentence from Beethoven. Sometimes you can sacrifice the rule for the motif. Uh, and then it kind of started getting into what we have right now, where the concept is paramount. That's like the most important thing. And yeah, it's a divide. It's a very big divide, because I think industry artists understand aesthetic nowadays like never before. It's actually astonishing. Like, if you just turn on Netflix, the cinematography, man, what the hell? Like, I'm watching some of these shows and I think they have better cinematography than like Oscar-worthy film had 10 years ago. And if you look at actually like resources on cinematography, there was nothing back in the days. Now there's like outpouring of like art direction, cinematography, aesthetics, studies. Like, what are leading lines, for example, like proper studies to looking at it, like does it work, do people actually follow these things? And this entire science is coming down to we getting something like Into the Spider-Verse. I don't know if you watched it or not, but for me that's just like a such a love letter. It's like a statement to we understand what triggers you. Or companies like Pixar, they have like these buttons in the headquarter, right? Like, okay, now you cry, now you laugh, now you feel like nostalgic. It's incredible. And on the other hand, you have the art scene, which it's so divided. Like, again, I also like modern music, for example. I don't mean hip hop, I mean modern orchestral music. Uh, but if you like take a random person to one of those music halls and they're gonna sit down, they're like, okay, that destroyed my soul. What the hell is this? Like my ears are bleeding. It's like this distance between uh, capital A art in many different forms. Uh, and I think part of it is because the capital A art has continued being like uh, providing service to collectors and what I would consider elites in terms of economical elites because they can pay for these very expensive expeditions, and that has kind of turned taste into a class thing, and that has always the case. That was always the case. That's nothing new. What is new is Instagram. Where you put something, and it doesn't matter how much money is in your bank account. A like is a like. It's not completely true because you can pay for bots and stuff like that, but still, like, the core idea that what the like people decide what's valuable art based on the statistics. And of course you get a lot of like bikini armors and bondage stuff and stuff like that. That's And people say, and that's the other way around, where more hardcore artists say that's not art. Look at that. And I think this divide is fascinating. It's fascinating because both have a lot to offer to each other, but the bridge between them is long gone. Like it's already shipped.
Yeah, I know. And basically, how I see it is that most people who use like social medias in general, like not just most people who use social medias in general. Oh my god, I sound so obnoxious. Like people in general. Um, the first thing, the way things affect them is through their, like, mammalian brain, something like the lizard brain, like monkey brain as another term for it. So for example, when they see art with, like, nude art, or bikini armor, as you said, like stuff like this, I mean, of course, that those type of artists and posts get a lot of, like interactions. But for example, if it's an art piece that's it's a well done art piece that's kind of trying to describe a story, might not get as much. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It would kind of, like, right now there's niches in so many things that's kind of fascinating. Like, and one of the phases, as like, big companies and just companies in general try to find, like, good artists or people who work on their projects, is through social media. There's a lot of talent scouts on social media. You might be surprised, both on our station and Instagram. So if you just work, I think, by the end of the day, if you just work on your niche, there's always people who gonna they find you and message you themselves if you actually get good at that niche.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the note I want to end the subject on, because yeah, that's the appropriate thing to do. And about, like, art, we talked about Iranian arts and generative arts, and of course you've also done some of the illustrations and paintings, which the four paintings that's kind of pinned is one of your pinned tweets on it, Twitter as well, which I'm going to add them to the reel as well here for people to see what I'm talking about. Where did that fascination start, and how do you see a possible potential of, like, collaborating generative art with Persian art language together?
Yeah. Fascination started with my family traveling around Iran. Uh, Both my parents, my dad loves nature and mountains, and that's where you would find me in weekends climbing some mountains in Iran. And my mom loved mountains as well, but also history. So we would like travel around and see all these locations. And Iran is well, I mean, it's an incredible country in terms of like history wise, right? It was the center of tension between major civilization since the dawn of time. And there's like layers after layers of different civilizations in there. And just going around and realizing how irrelevant these stories are nowadays, to, let's say, global discourse, but at the same time so relevant to Iranian culture. You can like go to Iran, take any like ceremonies, and you can like trace it back hundreds of years, even Islamic ones, where you wouldn't expect it. You would think, oh, that's a Islamic thing. And it's like, oh no, that existed 3,000 years ago too. The names just changed. um, so I was always fascinated with that. I was fascinated with that, and even the part in Iran between like the Islamic art and the pre-Islamic art is a huge tension, and conflict is a source of entertainment for me. I really enjoy this conflict of ideas. Um, yeah, so I do see a lot of potential in that. I also The biggest potential I see in my own work is to kind of also uh, establish a sense of cultural identity, in a sense of establish how it looks like to be a Persian. That's it. That sounds so vague. It's really hard to describe, but you're in Istanbul, right? I could tell you so many things about Istanbul in terms of visuals, right? You have the domes, and you have the towers, and you have these shapes in Hagia Sophia, and you have the busy bazaars, and it's like there's so much visual identity to Istanbul. Now, if someone says, "What's the visual identity of Iran?" You get a lot of stuff like the Persian garden scene I made. That's easy to get. Like, people think of Yazd and Isfahan and Shiraz, but what about the Persian Empire? What about the Sassanid? What about the Parthian? And if you like compare it to some other countries with as much history, like China, Japan, Egypt, it is criminal how underdocumented these senses of aesthetics are. Like, what did they wear? And like, what you get are things like 300, right? Or what you get is the latest game with uh, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where they had like some scenes with the Persians in it. And I have the art book here. I was like reading the concept artist who worked on it, and he was like, "Oh, we did a lot of research for all these things." And there's a ninja there. And I'm like, "What is this guy doing here? Like, you can't be serious. What research did you do? Like, Google it. It's the first page." Um, so to kind of like establish that cultural identity of how things look like, that's where I see the most value provided. As for the intersection between generative one, there is an artist you should actually talk to. He lives in Iran. He's in Isfahan, Mehdi Bahrami, and he made a game called Engare. Uh, Engare is about, well, Islamic art. It's kind of like a game about Islamic art. You can kind of generate some of those patterns. You can generate some of those like geography, and he has made a lot of other games in that aspect. And I think that's like exactly that. Like, because Islamic art, especially, it's a good type of like thing to do generatively, because they used to make it like that themselves, right? They had rules for how these patterns pop up, and when you know those rules, you can just make it yourself using a computer. And I actually have on Shader Toy, inspired by the work that he did, a shader that like endlessly generates Islamic patterns using a bunch of like rotating circles, um, which is something we used to play at with as kids. It was one of the playthings we had. So yeah, yeah.
All right, interesting. And I'll definitely check out Angara later because I just opened the tab and I just checked it. And it looks kind of interesting. I'm surprised I've never seen that before. Um, and all right, let's take a break from all these technical questions and let's jump into kind of like a break time from all these technical questions, basically. Kind of like a trivial question, which is what area beside the area you're working on right now would you be interested to explore and learn in the future, given if you had enough time and resources and energy and everything was set? Like it could be something completely non-art related as well. And just to extend this question a bit, it doesn't necessarily have to be like learning something and a skill. It could be doing anything. It could be an aspiration or some abstract goal you have in mind for your life. What is that?
Um, but the next goal I have, which is, and beside getting driving license, I should really get that thing. Beside that is music, like composing music, because I have been getting more and more into art direction, as I mentioned, and there's a lot of like parallels between, because it's like the same thing, right? Why do we perceive things as harmonious, right? And there's so much parallel between sound and visuals, that it almost kind of feels like I have learned a lot of like the basis of the music side by just going through the visual side already. And I'm just, I can't wait for the day where I know both and I can like add that to the number of things I can add to my tiny scenes to really bring these emotions I have inside and make someone else feel what I feel. That's like magical. Like that's the best thing. Like when you make something and someone else feels what you feel, that's the highest form of communication for me. And music is very powerful in that sense. Like one of my favorite symphonies is Mahler, Mahler Symphony Number One, and also Five. And for example, Five in the second movement, there is a piece where he wrote that as he got married, and then he didn't think like he's like worthy of the wife and all that, and you can hear like the fear in the music, right? So he's happy, he's like, oh, that's the woman is like, she's amazing, she's like the person I have been in love with, and then comes the music and it's just like kind of sad. And I was like, this is incredible. Like he died when, like 70 years ago, 80 years ago. I'm sitting here, I'm feeling his emotions. And um I think visual art is kind of like complete when you supplement it with other things, because there's always a limit to what you can say just visually, just in the same way there is a limit to what you can say through words, right? Not that they don't have merit on their own. I'm like, I love poetry, I regularly read poetry, but it's like when they put together you can make people feel things. So I would say music is definitely the thing I'm gonna go more into. And the next thing I would really like to do is also explore other ways to teach. uh, Teach is the wrong word for it actually, because in my blog I don't teach, I learn and I share my learning. And I really like that format because I don't have to worry about making mistakes. If someone says you made a mistake, I'm like, thank you for teaching me. You know, I'm not like, oh, I'm the authority on the topic, I'm going to teach you about color theory or whatever. I'm like, here are some things I learned about color theory throughout the years. And I kind of like want to find simpler way of doing that with less overhead, with the help of technology. I just have to like think through that, what I can do there.
All right, interesting. And well, we reached the final section or question of the podcast, which is appropriately called final words. All right, I'm going to explain it in as short as possible to tell you what it means. Basically, imagine you have right now a limited amount of time, a space of window of time to communicate with anyone who's listening to this podcast in the future. It could be a week from now, a year, 10 years, 50 years. I don't know if the world hasn't been annihilated by 200 years, maybe by then. Basically, any point of future. People have been listening to this podcast and they reached this point of this episode. And you have this window of time to leave any message from a human to another human being. It could be messages, anything. What would that be?
Good Korean ribs is the best thing ever. I'm kidding. That would have been the second most important thing. I guess the most important thing I would say is, well, you have. I hope some of the artworks I have made is available for you to see, and then just go and have a look. And who knows? Just like I feel Mala nowadays, maybe someone looks at that Persian garden, and although they don't know the ball because they were never a little Persian boy who played around in the streets, but they look at the way the light bounces off and fills the space and the coziness, and think like, wow, I feel like I'm a child again, you know. And I hope that survives. My name can be gone, but I hope the emotions is there, so that people can experience it.
All right,
That's it.
awesome. And thank you so much for coming by for this episode. I really appreciate that. And thank you to anyone who tuned in and listened to this episode. I really appreciate that as well. It's one of the rare episodes that's past the 1 hour mark. And thank you everyone for listening to this episode. Again, leave in the comments any critiques or suggestions or anything you have. Um, whether on YouTube or Castbox or Instagram. As you can already tell, my brain is kind of malfunctioning and the words doesn't doesn't come out quite properly. And yeah, that's about it. And thank you again for coming by, and see you guys in the next episode. Bye.